Hi, Cynthia. How are you?
Hi. Good. How are you?
Great. It's so great to be able to talk to you. This is to let everybody know ArtHeads, my platform for interviewing artists that really interest me, piqued my interest. And of course, there's so many, but it's so special to talk to you because I've been a great admirer of your work and what you do and your insights. And we're in a group together. Um, and that's an art group together through a network, but it's a installation group because we have our own issues about installation and photographing our work and the lighting and how to get all of that documented, all our struggles with our work and making proposals, when it's hard to photograph the work, just it's not like singular works. We want to see it in relationship and in an environment. And yours is very much about that. It's about body. It's about so many things that I care about. And I really appreciate hearing your story and talking to you in more depth. That's what these interviews are more about because I like getting to know you and I think everybody else will too. So I wanted to start off just thanking you uh, for doing the interview. And can you tell us just a little bit, or tell me a little bit about your background, where you're from, and a little bit about like how, were you always an artist? Did you grow up thinking about art? Like what was your atmosphere like at home? And then, how did you come to get into going to the schools you did?
Well, I mean, I always liked to make things. I do remember that. I had an uncle who had a girlfriend who would draw things, and I can't even remember how old I was, but I think I was pretty young, and I would watch her, and I thought it was just magic.
Hmm.
Um, and whenever I showed people something that I had made, it was always this really special feeling that it gave me. Um, and so I think that was part of it, but I hadn't really considered it as something that I would pursue as a career. Um, I think until like the day I declared my major in undergrad. Um, and that was just this strange kind of decision to that maybe I could do things I enjoy,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
felt pretty revolutionary and maybe like a little bit reactionary at the time. Like a kind of rebellion because I had always been a really good student academically and felt like I would pursue something that was the most academically focused,
Yeah.
um, which art does not tend to be. There doesn't tend to be. So it was strange for somebody like me to feel like that was the direction that I wanted to take. Um,
And
but
then
once I kind of committed to it, then I really,
that's awesome.
and
Like, so
yeah.
when you were in like high school, was some of your focus towards your art and
I did take a lot of art classes in high school. I mean, I was really tight and over. I remember like a particular drawing I did. It was a still life, and I just beat the hell out of the paper, just
yeah.
like constant. I think there was some kind of a large shell in there, and I just couldn't get it like I wanted. And I just
Yeah.
remember like the obsessive
Yeah.
reworking of the
I
drawing.
can so relate to that and to the
Yeah,
idea of being like getting response from people on your work because
yeah,
it's like when people are responding, you're like, oh, I do something good. I'm good at this, and you want to keep doing
yeah.
more of it. And so, that kind of led the way. And then, yes, I remember like just I had for you it was a shell. I had boondockers, like these shoes, like, and I would just like work on it until the paper was worn out. I wish I had that piece from 100
Yeah.
years ago.
I know. I wonder if I still have the drawing somewhere.
That'd be so fun to see it.
I know.
Yeah. So that's so cool. So then uh you, tell us about, tell me, I'll say me, about how, because we've been talking a little bit about how you went from making your work and what kind of pressure that put on you, like from uh just learning and being in this growing art environment with other artists. Like where, how did that feel for you as you started making your work that was important to you? What drove you to, and we're going to pull up some images to talk about the body. I mean, that's so paramount in your work is
Mhm.
the body. And that's something that, gosh, as women, as artists, I mean,
Right,
people, but I'm thinking about women and body image, and
right,
it's so particular to some of your work. So
right.
tell me how you
Well,
tapped into that.
I think I mean, I started out in painting and drawing, and I had a pretty traditional but really strong grounding in that. And so, I was looking at a lot of art historical images, and
Mm,
I've always struggled with my weight. So I, looked at Rubens' work and things like that and felt kind of seen maybe. But I also appreciated like the formal
yeah.
fullness. And
Yeah.
then the first material that really kind of enchanted me was clay. And I discovered the work of Toshiko Takaizu, who I really have to get to the Noguchi Museum to see the show. But she was sort of my first art hero. I had a really strong response to her work, which is very bulbous and has a really tiny opening, and just that sense of pressure, but also like the serene beauty of the forms.
Yeah.
I really reacted strongly to that. So the earliest work I made was clay vessels that were sort of bulbous, um,
Yeah.
and placed in relationships that more or less referenced the body. So that was the
That's
first sort
cool.
of identification I felt with a physical thing that I had made, I think.
And where did you first get into clay? I mean, I could just imagine that because I mean, when you're painting the figure, and you know, Rubens to me is, the line quality and
Yeah, right, right,
what he could say with a line.
right.
But how did you get into this like I could imagine that it becoming like a physical object made a huge difference for you.
Well, so I took the first clay class I took was as an undergrad, and the first day that the professor showed us how to make a pinch pot, which is when you squeeze the clay into a coil and then you add it and then you pinch it, like it's a very physical process. And as part of the lesson, we had a race. Um, and I beat him like and I don't think that that was like the deciding factor, but just that squeezing motion was
Yeah.
really, it felt kind of cathartic and meditative. And I don't know if when that was before or after I found Toshiko Takaizu's work, but just the vessel form and the idea of the body as a vessel and the use of the body to create it, and the inner space that you could make with that pinching coil building process, that interior space was such an important kind of refuge. And
Mm,
that interior was really captivating to me. But even from the very earliest, like making it kind of visually inaccessible, um,
yeah.
I think that was just really kind of intuitive.
Yeah. I mean the inner struggle and I mean the inside outside, it
Yes,
kind of
yeah.
completes a lot of it. Also, I mean and we'll pull up your images, but the I remember the painting, the piece that you made that related to the de Kooning with the two
Oh,
wings.
right,
That
yes,
was, yeah. So that was the space between. So
exactly.
like you were thinking about body and struggling. And what did that look like for you at the time? Or should we go to some of the images and start looking?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think the first image is the first figure that I made. The first time I made a full figure,
Yeah,
literally and figuratively.
yeah,
Um, but you know, this was in response to an assignment. And so I had a real resistance to working literally with the figure, making something that looked like a body. And so basically I translated that pinching coil building process of making a vessel
yeah.
into creating a body. And so this is hollow, like there's no interior structure because I really wanted to maintain that interior space. And so I built it just like I would a pinch pot, like just started
Oh,
with the
that's so
two
cool.
feet. Um,
And was
and
that all in one piece?
yes,
What size is that? I mean, you could tell it's,
it's life size.
wow, that's so awesome.
Yeah, so I think I had to repair one of the ankles, but
Well, that's what happens too, like in
exactly.
real
Well,
life,
yes.
right?
Ironically, yes, that's happening
Ironically.
right now. If
Oh,
only I just glue it back together.
yeah,
Like
it just, it'd be so nice. We could just glue our stuff back
exactly.
together.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and you know, it's just so like real in your face. Like you can't avoid everything about this. This is,
Well, and yeah, and ironically, like this looks a lot more like I do now than I did then, but sort of dysmorphia wise, I mean, I guess I felt like this then.
okay.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think the sort of fussiness that I had when I was drawing in high school rears its head when I did things like the hands and the feet and the face.
Okay, yeah.
And
Yes.
so,
Yes.
you know, I wasn't as attracted to the idea of trying to be really uh, sort of mimic real body parts.
Mhm.
Um, you know, that because it does tend to send me into this obsessive overworking.
Yeah.
But you know, once I'm into the sort of fat parts that can be bulbous and have that sort of interior pressure that
Yeah.
appeals to me for whatever reason.
Well, the
Uh,
torso is always appealed to me. Like that, even just the
exactly.
torso,
Yeah. Yeah,
that
very much. Yes.
says
Yes.
so much, and without being the whole person even. And, it's ha- it's kind of interesting too, right? To have these fears or insecurities about body, and here you're making something that's so out there for everyone to see, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't even remember. I don't remember feeling insecure
Oh,
about it
okay.
or even feeling a real identification with it for some reason.
Oh, okay, that's good.
I know, which seems really strange.
Yeah.
Um,
No, it
but
seems
yeah,
like
I
somebody with a strong sense of confident self. That
yeah.
sounds like. And then tell us like these little white marks, that's where it was kind of lying.
Right. So this was fired atmospherically, which means that you don't actually apply a glaze to the surface. You put it in a kiln, and when it's at a certain temperature, you introduce organic matter into the kiln and it vaporizes and creates a surface or sometimes just color on the clay.
Mhm.
So so it was laying down when it was in the kiln, and the white marks are from, it's called wadding, and it's just used to keep the pieces from sticking together in the clay
Oh, cool.
in the kiln.
So this
And
was
so
fired all as one piece?
yes, yeah, because it's
Huge.
just a hollow shape, you
Yeah,
know. It's basically like a vessel.
right.
So
Yeah,
um
we'll go here.
so
So
yeah,
this,
and then so once I got to graduate school, um you know, because I was still not particularly interested in making a body or making a literal interpretation of a body. And this has always been one of my favorite paintings. It's de Kooning's Clam Diggers, and it's pretty small, but this space between, so the idea that the figures, that there's no real demarcation between where they are and where they aren't, and then there's this really active area that is kind of like
Yes.
a Venn diagram of them, like between them, but also like maybe parts of them. And so I got really
Yeah, it
sort of,
almost feels like a figure in there.
exactly, so I decided that I would build that space as a physical
Yes.
piece. But I, so it's the same process, the coil building, the
Mm,
open interior, and it's just like the shell of that space.
mhm.
Um,
Well, I like that you, like, early on, you're thinking about the concepts in the work so early on. That's
I mean, I always wanted to, and that's something that continues now. Like I always wanted to use materials in a conceptual way, like that there was a reason that what it was made out of,
right. And then this
that was
one,
part of the
like,
meaning.
we'll talk about this because too, it's like almost reminds me of my thought on the like torso, but it's like you're doing a
Exactly.
so
Right. So I did the feet, and then so I was working with the Three Graces archetype, and I built them up. I had done a previous version of this where they had heads and arms. But when I got to the heads and arms of these, I just really kind of hit a wall and could not figure out how to resolve it in a way that didn't feel like I was
right.
doing that obsessing thing again. And it was like, so I kind of gave myself the freedom to just not have them there. And they end up looking sort of like relics or
Yes,
like classical
right.
ruins, which I also really like.
Well,
um
and two, it's like it's a universal woman. It's not
right.
you're not like here's my face, here's my hair, that are
Well, and
defining marks. Yeah.
exactly. And for these, like, I know it doesn't translate, but for me, I was never, like, to me this is not a solid object. This is like the description of a layer that is outside the biological body. It is just the fat. So even though the feet are there,
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
to me it's not like there's no organs, like it's
Hmm.
outside of that. It's describing the space that's around that.
That's right. Yeah, I love that. And
So
then
inside that space, I also thought of it as being kind of chaos because, as I said, I'd struggled with my weight and I was really doing a lot of reading about feminism and the body. And so I felt this sort of chaos, feeling like your body is out of control, basically.
mm,
And I wanted those bodies to be out of control. And I really started to push that. Like I stopped doing the feet and I just did this sort of chaotic space that was around the body.
that's
And I
incredible.
wanted it to look like it was collapsing, under its own weight. Like I had made the dainty ankles of the Three
Yes.
Graces, but I pushed it to the point that it did in fact collapse. So that was this. And
Yeah.
fortunately, when this happened, which was crushing to me, there was an amazing visiting artist that term, and he asked me like why I was still firing the clay, which was like a real epiphany, like because it turned out that I had really lost interest in fired clay, as kind of, I mean, it's basically turns to stone, and all of the things that I love about clay no longer are present in that state. Um,
Right.
so uh, I think, I don't know if sort of I realized that, and that's why I was pushing it to want it to
Hmm.
collapse, because
Or
I
just
wanted
sort
it to
of,
be,
yeah.
I think I wanted it to seem like it was collapsing because that had a vitality that was lost by the time that it was fired.
Yeah.
Uh,
And it's like you lose that that spontaneity of the body and the movement
yeah, exactly.
of
Right.
yeah. So oh
So
my
then
God. I
my
love
thesis show, which this is, I apologize for the the old slide photo.
Oh, it's great.
So the piece on the right and the piece in the center, one of them was being built. They're both unfired clay. One of them was, the yellow one was being built as the red one was slaking into a pool of water in the pedestal. So it was kind of like this balance of emerging and
Yes,
disappearing.
yes.
But like really emphasizing the nature of clay as like this water-based thing that can return to that thing,
Yes.
and also the process, because process had always been really important to me in terms of like the relationship between how the thing is made and what that means for what the thing is. And so yeah, I was excited to
That's exciting. Yes.
give myself, yeah, it was another sort of like, I mean, I feel like most of my art school experience was unlearning like my own sort of
That's great.
self-limiting tendencies.
Yeah, and then the thing is we don't know we're limiting ourselves until,
Right.
right?
Yes. So that's an earlier iteration of the one. I mean,
Uh-huh.
this is one of my favorite things that I've ever made. Like
Yeah.
I I just wish, I wish that it could always be wet clay.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and then this was one of the last things I fired. So this was an odalisque, like the reclining
I
nude
love
where
that
the
it's the odorless.
female figure
Yeah.
is equated with the pillows. And this is like 8 feet long, and looks like
It's amazing.
a big pile of
Yeah. And the color goes with it too, but it's so
exactly. But
perfect.
that was, yeah, that was the natural color of the clay. But then I
Uh-huh.
just like, I think this was a glaze. But yeah,
Yeah, it's so perfect. Oops, I'm sorry. Okay,
that's
so
okay.
tell us what happened. I'm going to stop the screen share because this is kind of like a little bit of a break right.
Right. Well, so you know, the difference between that image and the next image.
Yeah.
So shortly before I finished graduate school, um it was on a day that I had 900 pounds of clay delivered and I was in a difficult relationship. It was a really stressful period. Um, and I had a panic attack, which I didn't recognize at the time was a panic attack. And it was really terrifying. It was terrifying in a way that I didn't realize could be. It was shortly after Margot Kidder had had a nervous break, or I think she had a psychotic break, and they found her in the shrubs.
Okay.
And so I thought that's what was happening to me. I had this urgent need to get out of the space where I was.
And that
And
was while you were at school.
yeah, I was in the gallery. We were doing a critique of an undergrad's work. Um, and so I thought I was losing my mind. Like I thought it was just over. I felt like I couldn't put one foot in front of the other. Um, and so I didn't think I was going to be able to make it home to my apartment. But eventually I did, and I was immediately afraid to do everything. I had felt sort of invincible up to that point, and then I immediately felt helpless. Um, I mean, it was just in the blink of an eye, like everything changed. And
Yeah, it's like it might be hard for people to understand. It's hard to understand. Like, I mean, I've
well,
had,
I
yeah.
mean, yeah, like if you've never had a panic attack, it is surreal. It's, I mean, sometimes I tell people that it's like if you're in an airplane and you're told that the airplane is going down. Um, or if you're like in a building and then you find out that the building is on fire, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, I'll
And
just say, just to fit in right there, is like I've had panic attacks where it's like a fear of something, but that it eventually like resolves that it's
yeah.
like okay, like but it sounds like yours was beyond that. Like it was like
Well, yeah.
so
Well, so
far.
some
Yeah.
people, you know, some people have panic attacks and they just are like you. They're just like, that was weird. But it was so scary to me that I don't know if that's why, but I immediately developed panic disorder, which just means that like your whole life becomes about worrying about having a panic attack.
Yeah.
And so I became agoraphobic. I didn't want to go out. I didn't want to be by myself. And this was like the absolute opposite of the person that I had been like the day before. I mean, it was really just crushing.
It sounds like it. I mean, it's just like a major change in your life,
Yeah,
just all at
I
once.
couldn't, I didn't know what to do. Like I didn't know. So I went to the campus health thing the next day, and they just gave me like a benzodiazepine pill and told me to take it when I felt a panic attack coming on, which if it had just been, if I hadn't already like developed this whole syndrome of it was the most terrifying thing and I had to do whatever I could to keep it from ever happening again. And so I basically like had a nervous breakdown and had to leave. I was living in Seattle at the time, and then I ended up instead so my plan had been to move to New York after I graduated, but I didn't have anything practical in place for that to happen. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I had this really Pollyanna sort of inevitable art stardom
Yeah.
dream.
It'll just
Uh,
kind of, yeah, it'll happen.
but like the practicalities of that. And so then once I was agoraphobic, it was very difficult to work. Um, you know, I really just collapsed and ended up having to move back to Kentucky, and I lived in my mother's basement for a while. And I basically just thought like, you know, I had failed and I was not going to be able to be an artist. And, you know, I had this chance and I had blown it, and, you know, I was not strong enough, and all of these really terrible, like, coping mechanisms, I guess. And so that was a really difficult
And were
time.
you able to finish I mean, you were on your thesis show.
Yeah, I did finish it. You know, I think I already had enough of an idea of what I wanted to do before that happened that I just did the one day at the, I think it was like 2 months or a month and a half before my thesis show. But I just became really dependent on having people around me that I thought could take care of me because I
Wow.
didn't feel like I could take care of myself. Um, Yeah, so I mean it's been like half my life now. That was 27 years ago, and I'm
Yeah.
54, and it's really, I think because it was so long ago, I kind of have normalized it and
Yeah.
forget how
Yeah.
traumatic it
Sure.
was and how
Sure. You lose touch with that because you don't feel it,
exactly.
you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so you know, I had thought my life was going to be one way, and then all of a sudden it was completely something different. Um,
Have you ever attributed it to any particular things or set of things or circumstances, or
well,
do you
so
leave
I
that
mean,
separate?
yeah, it kind of depends on who you ask. I mean, there's there's a genetic component. So, you know, my mother went through it, and I think her mother probably did too. Um, Basically, it's like your body's fight or flight response.
Yeah.
So if you've ever felt like you were in a really dangerous situation and you needed to get out of there, it's like that, but you can't get out of there because it's in your head.
Yeah.
So it's like it's like a threat response when there's
Yeah.
no actual threat.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, I've had a lot of therapy. I recently, it's possible that it's like things that happened when I was very young that made me feel unsafe. Um, and so, yeah, basically you just don't feel safe.
Yeah. And
Um,
yeah. And maybe too, getting ready for transitioning out of school into you don't know what.
yeah, I mean, that was definitely part of it. Like, I think I was trying to just live in this bubble of everything's going to be fine, everything's going to be fine, it's all going to work out, but
Yes.
like not really taking practical steps to ensure that that was the case. And then
I
the
mean, but you
600
don't get
pound,
any direction sometimes when you're in school. You're
well, you
just
know,
like,
that's true. And
yeah.
thankfully, because when I was in school, we had very limited professional development
Right.
instruction. And I know that's changed now, which I'm thankful to hear, because, you know, like my professors had all done really well as artists and
Yeah.
didn't really have to
Yeah.
do the same, which is not to say they didn't work hard, but like things had
Right.
worked out for
You
them.
weren't in touch with the people that it didn't work out for. You're around the
Exactly.
people that it did.
Exactly. And, you know, obviously the art world. So, you know, in the intervening years, the art world changed a lot. Like, of course, we were using slides when I graduated. And so I just basically went underground. I mean, you know, I just disappeared. I
I
dropped
must have been
out
so
of,
painful because,
oh, yeah.
we're trying to like share our work with the world, and here it's just
Yeah.
becomes too painful to even do.
Yeah.
So tell me
Yes.
like what happened that transition, because again, like we've talked, but that leads us into the next body of work because you're at home,
Right.
you're kind of not doing or what, well, tell us what you
Well,
end
I mean,
up.
I was trying to work. I mean, I knew that I needed to get some sort of help. I started going to therapy. I started taking an antidepressant. Um, you know, I was learning how to cope with the panic. Um, and the medication made it less intense and less frequent, but
Mm.
I was still really overwhelmed with fear and didn't want to be alone and was terrified of having a panic attack because it is so destabilizing,
Yeah.
and it's like in your body that it's happening. um but you know, eventually I was able to work, um and then I was working at a paint your own pottery place, which was like my I
Right.
mean, it's almost like ironic
Right.
in how much of not what I wanted to do that was.
Yeah, we
But
occasionally get the smackdown from the
exactly,
world.
exactly, exactly. I mean, I had already felt like I was as low as I could go, and then I mean, you know,
I can
anyway,
relate because at one point in my life, I was doing, well, many times like my own work and showing it. And then it was like, it was famine time and I had to get like a job, doing something. And the only thing was like, oh, maybe I could do something retail. And I was like, there is no way I'm going to work in a gallery. And but I want to be around art. And then I ended up working for like this so-called high-end crafts, but like it was very commercial. It wasn't that, but it was like,
yeah,
what am I doing here?
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's like, because anyway, so I said I didn't want to work in a gallery. I think that's because I had jealousy. I had a chip
yeah, yeah,
shoulder, and I was just like, I wasn't prepared for that. So I
yeah.
totally get that. Yeah.
Well, it was just such a shock. Like
Yeah.
it was so shocking to have gone from like in a grad program, like, you know, having my work in an art museum, and then all of a sudden.
Yeah. I get it.
But anyway,
Yeah.
so I was the manager of that store, and one day, so I was like in charge of inventory, and we would, you know, you paint on bisqueware, which is work that's been fired one time. And we would get these shipments, and they would always come in packing peanuts. And so I think even then I could not bring myself to throw away the packing peanuts. So I would bag them up and
Awesome.
put them in the basement. And one day I was down there, and there was like a lot of packing peanuts by then, bags and bags of them. And I just had like this flash of inspiration that they were absolutely the perfect medium for me to do that layer that I had been
Yes.
trying to depict in grad school, but also because they brought the extra meaning of like the fragility that I was now experiencing, because I knew that I wasn't, when I could hopefully make work again, I knew that it was going to be different. It was going to have to be different, but
Yes.
I didn't really know which way that was going to go. But then
Right.
when I had that flash about the peanuts, it was kind of like, yes, this is my thing.
Yeah,
You know,
because
this,
like, like you think about these peanuts and they're packing, they're like holding
yeah,
something, and you're talking about body and fat and holding
exactly.
something, and you're talking about waste or things that could be empty and the lightweight quality
Exactly.
of those.
Well, and there were so many of them that it was like kind of scary. You know, there was like this element of threat, like that I was
Yeah,
trapped in them. Uh,
yes,
you
yes.
know, this excess thing. And all of those were like, oh my God, yes, this is it. And so then I just like the packing peanut became my muse. And so
Yeah.
now, even now, like I did this series of photographs later of like packing peanuts as art historical nudes. And I use one of them as like my avatar across the board because
Yes,
I really identify with it as like me, you know, like it's like that was such a gift from the universe.
it
Like,
really was. Like,
yeah,
you think about that and it's like, um, how this circumstance that brought you here. And two, like you were at school, like you couldn't make those giant things when you left school without,
exactly, exactly.
anyway, where would you do
Especially
that?
out of clay,
Right.
because you know that requires so much infrastructure.
Okay.
But yeah, it was an absolute revelation. Uh,
Yes. So we're going to go to this next slide, which is this one.
yeah, so this is the first body of work that I made after grad school. And I had met somebody, um, I got introduced to the clay community in Louisville where I was living because one of my teachers, Akio Takamori, came to town to do a workshop and I showed up and I hadn't really been participating in the art community. And he didn't know where because I had just bowed out of Seattle. And so he was happy to see me and we talked and everybody else there was like, who is this person who knows Akio Takamori, you know?
That's so cool.
And so I got involved in the clay community, and one of the guys worked at this production pottery and was trying to set up a residency, and he asked me if I wanted to do it. And so this is a porcelain box with I think these are iron packing peanuts. So I had long wanted to do this piece where the box was really fragile and the peanut was
Yes.
really resilient because I felt fragile on the outside, but I maintained hope
Oh,
that I still had some inner strength.
yes.
But also
Oops. Sorry.
those peanuts are a threat to that box, you know, they could
Right.
destroy it
Yeah, they
easily.
could just like from the weight of them, sorry.
Exactly. And
Uh,
that actually happened at a show that I sent one
oh,
of.
really?
Yeah. But anyway, so I knew that like I couldn't just, I mean, it took me like 2 years to figure out how to make this box because porcelain does not want to do that, any of that. And
Hmm.
so once I figured it out, I knew that I couldn't just have one box with peanuts. And so I thought about what other casting materials. So these are lard peanuts melting in a rubber box, but this is sort of
Wow.
like so the lard, I still was staying with the body as like
Wow.
the gooey inner part.
Yeah.
Um, and this was also the first time that light was a really important element.
Yes, light really came into these, right?
Exactly. So there were 14 boxes and they were all like they were silk and cotton and wool and rubber, glass, iron, steel, and they were all cast the same size. So the only difference between them was like the material, so that the material was the meaning. And then they were titled as dates, like whether I felt strong on the outside or on the inside. And
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
yeah, so this was a really important show for me. And I ended up
Yeah,
getting a
some of them
fellow.
have the translucency and some
Exactly. So
more.
that, yeah, so the choice of materials was also
Right,
like, you know, transparent, translucent, opaque,
right.
shiny, all of those sorts of
Yes.
things. Um, and they're really small. They're like 4 inches. Um, and then I was part of a group of women sculptors, which was really great because I was the youngest member, and then one member was like almost 90, and so they were a really good source of support. Um, and I showed with them a few times. This was probably the first thing that I had in a group show with them, and so it's just pink packing peanuts, which the pink ones are anti-static, so they're used to ship electronics. But I was interested in the idea of anti-static in the context of kind of discourse and feminist, just like quieting the messages.
Yes.
Mm.
Well, did you meet these women through the clay community?
Yes, I did. Yeah. Um,
These are so great.
Thanks. So this is an installation.
I just feel like I would love to be in that room.
Well, so these and the piece before, the Venus, so they, they're obviously abstracted, figurative. They're, they're like life size, but these were like three different there. So the ones on the left are insulation, the
Mm.
ones in the middle are upholstery, and the ones on the right are packaging.
I just love that it's insulation. I mean, again,
Yeah, so
just the
yeah, so
word
it's
insulation fits and
exactly. And
know what
so
that
it's like this central element and then this puffiness surrounding it. And so this was called hold. And they're suspended just above the floor so that and they're pretty close together. So it's difficult to not bump them. And when you bump them, they
that's
move,
what I
which
was,
is
yeah. Yeah.
really disconcerting, but I really like that.
Yeah, I like that they're just hovering and
Yeah.
we can't
I mean,
see.
they look like well,
Right.
especially like the ones on the left, they
Yeah,
look like they're standing on the floor, but yeah, they'll swing if you bump them.
that's good.
And that's just that's the upholstery springs and the upholstery foam pillows.
They're so great.
Thanks. Um, so this is one of the next, so this is a long-term project which continues to this day. So this was made, these are each of the two packing peanuts are just cast plastic of actual packing peanuts, and then the two larger ones are made using hydrospan, which is a casting urethane that you soak in water and it expands um to make an exact replica at a larger size. And so I did a series of expansions because I wanted to make an installation where the room was filled with packing peanuts, so you would feel like you were
Yeah,
packed in them, and it would alter your sense of scale, and it would be kind of threatening, but they're also just like amazing things.
yeah.
um and so it was really technically demanding. I think I had to do like 4 expansions. So it's like make
I
a
was
mold.
just gonna ask that, like, could you like keep going with the expansion? Yeah.
Well, it just every time they were bigger, it was like more expensive because of the mold material, and like, the urethane that you soak in water gets sort of gelatinous, and then you have to make a mold of that, which is challenging.
Mm.
And it was really technically demanding, and it was really expensive, and I was not able to create enough to make the room full that I wanted. But so this is what they looked like when they were originally cast, this beautiful white that looks exactly like an actual manufactured foam peanut.
Yeah,
But so my plan was to kind of put them aside until I could have the money um to make the rest of them.
yeah,
But then they started to turn yellow because it was
yeah,
urethane, and
yes.
that totally broke my heart because I wanted them to be
Yeah, and
such an
it's not like a
exact.
nice yellow, it's
Exactly, no. And so I put them away for years, and then I moved to New York, and then like a couple years after we moved here, finally I was able to get a studio, and I was like, all right, I've been carrying, because I think I made like 60 of them.
that's a
It's
good
like
number.
I have to do something
Yeah,
because I want them to be in the world, and like me being sad about them having turned yellow is not going to change. And so I decided, like, I discovered these metal coatings, which is like actual bronze
Yes.
suspended in acrylic, and then you can use traditional patinas. And
Mhm.
so I like, obviously they're a monumental size for a packing peanut. So I liked the idea of them kind of being a monument to me finally
Yes.
kind of acknowledging that I couldn't change them and that they aren't going to be white, but they still exist. And so it's sort of a metaphor for like figuring out that you just have to work with what you have and
I
that
love
it
that
will
because that
be
relates to everything,
exactly.
you know,
Yeah,
that relates to, us
exactly.
trying to change ourselves, our habits,
Yes.
or everything. And it's like, no, those voices are still going to be there. And
Exactly. So I finished, I think I have 15 of them finished now. And I would love to cast one in actual bronze. I love it that they're kind of fake bronze because they're
yeah,
urethane foam with just a coating of bronze on them. So they're pretty lightweight, even though they look like they're
yeah,
cast bronze. Um, but yeah, so it's very much I feel like it's almost done, which is
yeah,
it's been kind of a clog in my,
yeah. It would
heart
be, yeah, I'd
circulatory
love to see
system.
these in person.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
there's one at the Zero Art Fair this weekend, so
oh, wow. And
that
so were you at this point starting to, now that you moved back to New York, which was your goal, like were you
yes.
starting to feel better from?
Well, this was jumping ahead to now
Okay.
just to show you. So this is still in Kentucky.
Okay.
Um, so this was like going back to the idea of the space around the body. I was thinking about armor and like the ridiculousness of armor made out of packing materials. Um, and the idea that it would protect you when it obviously wouldn't, and sort of this irrational uh maybe a bit of humor. And so, but I still wanted the process, so I cut out all of these individual bubbles from bubble wrap and then made these aluminum rings and kind of
My gosh.
meshed. I
That's
know
so
it was
cool.
ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it's great.
But I really
Sorry.
liked that idea. And it's something that I've returned to recently of like, I like the sort of geometry of
Yes.
armor, the ornament, all of those elements. Um, so between the Big Fragile, which is the large peanuts, that project kind of bogged me down. So I
Right.
only made two things between then and when I moved to New York. That was in 2008. And so one of them was the hauberk, which was the suit of armor, the coat of armor we just saw. And then this piece, which is 216 cubic inches. So it's a 6-inch cube, and it was made using foam beads. So it's like it's like pre-bead foam, which is something I'm obsessed with now. But I had found this bag of foam beads in my father's garage. So it was the first time that I used found materials that had a history that I didn't necessarily know, but where I had found them had a connection to me.
Yeah.
So I sewed them together with monofilament um, and
And that's not
titled
easy. Monofilament's so challenging.
I know, I
Got
hate it, but I also, so anyway, the title of this piece is 216 cubic inches at, and then the GPS coordinates of where it currently is, because it's like that particular 216 cubic inches. So I was really interested. So that's been the direction, the two directions of my work since then, is like this kind of spatial, um, locating yourself in the universe kind of thing in relationship to architecture, and then also the body thing. So
it.
it's like the space between, I think of my work as kind of existing between the wall and the outside of the body, and just what goes, that's where kind of everything happens. That's the kind of packaging of life.
Yeah, and
And
it's still a thread that runs through from the early beginnings.
yeah. So this was the first work that I did in New York. I had started making molds of packaging in Kentucky, and the first studio I had in New York, I just spent making plaster molds of air packaging. And for my first show, it was called Milk Teeth because these sort of look like teeth, and they're finished with milk, but they also, so they're made of hydrocal, which is plaster, and then they're mounted on the plaster wall. But milk teeth is also like the first teeth that you have. So
Right,
the that I was new to New York. Now this panel is on the wall, it's on the window of the alcove that is uh it was a spatial installation that kind of, if the cutes, it's hard to explain. This was on the window, and
right.
then the
It's hard
other,
to read it in this photo, but it's on the window and we're
right, so
looking out.
this is on the window, and then this window uh looking in was like a little alcove, and so I put the same number of plaster peanuts on each, I mean plaster bubbles on each wall of the alcove. This is across from the glass bubbles that are on the window,
Within the
making the
space.
fourth surface of that cube. So it's like this,
Yeah, it's and everyone can go to your website and
yeah,
see some of the
it was the first site specific thing that I did, which is something that I'm really interested in now, just kind of thinking about the space of that alcove and thinking about how work could claim that space, and the way that the work would interact across the space to intersect with the other surfaces that bound the space. Um,
And so this
so
is like what we're talking about with installation, how important the light,
exactly, right,
like
yes,
and how to read the
yes,
space.
exactly. Um, so when I moved to New York, I was living in the East Village, and one day there was a dumpster on the block, and I found these honeycomb board squares. These are like 4.5 inch squares. And that was like, I'd never seen them before. And I was like, that is an amazing thing. I mean, I fell in love with it. Just I've I'm very drawn to squares for some reason. This is very lightweight, and then I love the way that the surface of it kind of suggests what's under it, but you can't
Right.
really see it until you take it
Yes.
off.
Yes.
And so that was sort of the beginning of my collecting slash hoarding found packaging in the city. Um, it really opened up what I found, like the different kinds of things I found. So this is a cast of
Right.
the voids from that, just pouring plaster into. So it's the same kind of um, inhabiting those spaces, peeling that surface off to expose what's going on behind it, and then owning it physically. And then the thing that allowed those spaces to exist is absent now, but the spaces themselves have
Yeah.
taken on the presence of an object. That's all really interesting to me.
Yeah. It's
Um,
beautiful.
and then this is the glass one from a different, these are each, sorry, they're each unique because they're from different squares of honeycomb board because it's consumed in the process, which I find really
So
interesting.
that's a
Like,
cast glass.
yes.
Yeah. The look
So
of
it's like
cast
this,
glass is so attractive. It's
yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean, it's a ridiculous process, but so I'm interested in the way this little 4 inch square, like, it protected something to get it to its destination, and it's this same space sort of moving around the world.
yeah.
And I don't know where it came from. I don't know what
Right.
it was protecting, but somebody got whatever it was protecting that they wanted, and then
Right.
they got rid of it. And
Yeah.
so I have this sort of pathos for abandoned packaging. Um, so this was also part of the Milk Teeth show. This is from a mold of the front and back of a piece of 2 inch round air pillow packaging. And then the central element of the triptych is cast glass of um, 1.5 inch air pillow packaging, so that the glass replaces the air, and that it was
Also
made
makes
using
me
hot
think
wax.
about like a mattress, like what's, like what we sleep on and those shapes and, you know, it's
Yeah,
like what we're in between every night, you know?
exactly. Yeah, and I think of these porcelain pieces as like drawings, like
Yeah,
they describe the surface, and it's a very soft surface, but this is a very fragile material. It's very translucent, but it's uh really challenge. I don't remember, did I put a picture of it lit in here? Yeah. So I've been spending like the last 6 years trying to figure out how to take pictures of this work.
that's all.
Um, and
Uh,
it's an
So
ongoing
so
battle.
these right here, they're this?
Yeah.
So yeah, with the lighting.
Yeah. And I have a new photographer coming tomorrow to the studio to try to
Oh,
work on it with me.
oh, that's cool. Yeah, these
Yeah.
are great, the way the light
Yeah,
comes.
because I mean, it's really important to me that the porcelain is translucent. I mean, I love the
Right,
sort of papery quality of the
right. Here
dryness of
you
it.
don't read the translucency,
Exactly. So
but
I
they're
just
still beautiful. I mean, they're beautiful to look at.
thanks. It's just
Yeah,
I can't figure out how to communicate the entirety of them as translucent objects without like putting my thumb on the scale. So I was working on it just before we started talking today.
yeah, it's like, um, yeah. And plus, you wanna adjust the tones and everything.
Yeah, I mean, for some reason I make white things and that is like a nightmare
Yeah.
for photography.
Yes.
So this is just a closer, so I made these by injecting wax into the packaging and then using lost wax process. So I really like the idea of how that was made. So it's a record of the space where the air was. It's a
Again, you
direct
can
record.
imagine, like, this is reminiscent of that space in between the de Kooning,
Exactly. Yeah.
and I'm sure it was challenging to I'm sure you went through a few pieces of plastic getting that wax, like, finding the way to make that happen.
Yeah, no, I had to like put them in the freezer as soon as I injected them, I mean,
Oh, wow. That's
yeah,
good.
it was silly. So, around that same time, these are like I think I got a keyboard tray shipped to me, but I thought these were so beautiful and I hung them on the wall of my studio. But and I called it the Three Graces, but I couldn't fathom thinking of it as a work of art because
Yeah.
I didn't make it. I just sort of recognized it, I guess.
Well,
But
that's it, that's it.
what's that?
Well, that's making art,
Well,
recognition,
I'm
right?
trying to learn that, I mean, I still tend to want to spend a lot of time making things because
Mhm.
I have a really strong craft kind of commitment to
Right.
process, but I just think these are so amazing and like that's the spinal nature of that.
And it's like how you arrange it and photograph it.
Yeah,
There's
no,
like
I
a million
know.
things, that
Yeah, it's still a challenge. So this was like the first time that like I was like, oh, I found that, but it is complete the way it is, and anything that I would do to it would just, even though I actually am currently getting ready to do something with this same material where I'm altering it, but that was the first time that I was like, okay, even if I just found it. So this is actually just a found run of air pillows
right,
that
and
I
so that's huge because you found it's how you use them in the space.
right. So this has my breath in it instead of air.
Mm.
Um, and this was like a pandemic era. So,
Oh, nice.
like the idea that you're protecting yourself with it so that it's not just like random air that's doing the protecting, like it's actually like you're speaking or you're,
Right.
you know, breathing life
Your
into it. And
voice. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Okay, so then the other thing I was doing during the pandemic, and I think part of it, is plays into that whole I want to not I want to do a lot of work. I started cutting out the bubbles so that all the package that all the plastic that wasn't directly responsible for holding the air in, I cut away so that it's just the part that does the protecting.
Mm,
Uh, and they're totally weightless. Like they do this beautiful movement, this
mm,
swaying, even in
yes,
very limited everyday air circulation,
right.
um,
I
which
can
makes them
imagine.
seem fragile, which I really love. And they, because they're transparent, they have this real presence, absence thing. Yeah, I
I
just
like
can't
that
get,
you photograph them in this space. We get to see, we get a little bit of size relationship.
oh yeah.
And we're gonna watch this one now.
Okay, yeah, so this is just a large panel of honeycomb board that I found on my block that had been used to protect a mirror. So this is the ridiculously obsessive process that I used to make it. So you can see it's kind of invisible when you start, and then it takes on this solidity when you get to the
Right.
side of that, which is something that really appeals to me as like the presence absence thing. I thought when I found it that it would just be a matter of peeling that off, but no, it was
No,
months.
of course not. You had to pick at it for many
Um,
hours.
yeah, so but these, like when I found them, they were in a stack, and it was right after Hurricane Ida, I think. I found them on the
Mm,
Lower East Side, and they were just like flat rectangles, and they were lashed together, and I got them
wow.
home and took them apart and realized that there was water in there from the hurricane. And I was initially really disappointed, but then I realized that the water made it so that I could just peel off the facing.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
That's so cool.
and and so I just decided that I would go with that. I mean, it seems
Yes.
like every time I allow myself to go with something, it's just
Right.
really
It's like that little accident of like, oh, this is
exactly.
it's a
Yeah.
disaster.
So
And then you're
yeah,
like, no, it's not. It's the best thing that could happen.
exactly. So I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to go with that. So I left them outside, like behind my apartment, and just sort of started draping them on things and then letting them re-dry and then altering them again. And yeah, it was pretty
They're
exciting. It's
fantastic.
like I have to trick myself into like just
Well, what's
still,
nice is like you could have dismissed that. You could have easily
yeah.
have dismissed that and you didn't.
Well, and I think that the reason that I didn't was that I was taking a lot of pictures of them and they looked so amazing in the
Mm,
pictures that it was like, okay, so this was around the same time. This was a large, very thin panel of bead foam that I found also on my block, I think. And it was so thin that it was really difficult to get home without breaking it.
oh my
And
gosh.
but I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it as soon as I found it. This was a show I had at Automat in Philadelphia, and I knew that it had this central column as a feature of the space. And so I wanted to use this foam panel to echo that column, and kind of this piece is called
Yes.
Claim, and it's about claiming that column. So if you stand at a certain position, the foam line like aligns
Lines
with
up.
the column. So I had to
We
make
don't,
this
yeah,
on
we don't have
site.
a picture of that here, but everyone can hop on your site and see
Oh
that.
yeah, you can see it falling apart when we took it down because it was just basically like a line of foam. It was just the outside edge
Just
of
the
it because I
outside.
picked the rest of it away. Um, this is more recent work. These are all, it's the same kind of picking of bead foam. This was a single piece of packaging, which I think is the next image. Um, yeah, so this is what it was when I found it.
And
And
you
then
picked it all
I
to
picked
have
all the
this.
extra and
Oh
just
my God.
left the manufactured, so, because it's just the active part. It's
Right.
the part that did the protecting. It's the part that was touching the fragile thing that needed to be protected.
That's right.
Oh, so this is the showing the process. And I think on my website it has the audio so that you can hear that really satisfying pop that happens
I've
when
got it
you
on my
remove a
end.
bead.
Maybe you can't hear it, but I can hear it on my
Oh,
end.
you can hear it? Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah. So
Oh,
yeah,
I can hear it.
it's awesome.
And so, I'm still using light. This is a much smaller panel of the bead foam picked to the width of a single bead, and I got interested in the idea of like the picking side being like the private side where you're doing the
Mm,
work. And
yeah.
then the unpicked side, the manufactured side, is the more public side. Um, because it was moving around the world as this flat piece of foam, and then I bring it into my world and like do all of this obsessive picking and then create this private situation.
And it really gives you a sense of like dimension, and it's kind of like,
Yeah, so I really loved, I hung it next to the window, and I didn't realize how much glow it would get from the
right,
window light.
really
But
is good.
the idea was that you would have to peek around the back of it to see the private surface. Um,
This is
and
such a great
here I
book.
am. This is pretty recent. It's I'm going back to the armor thing,
Yes.
just using the packaging um on my body. Um,
It's such a
and
feel-good armor.
it's what?
It's a feel-good armor.
Oh,
You know,
yeah,
it feels good,
yeah.
right?
So
Yeah, it's so wonderful. That's a great shot.
thanks. Yeah, it's been strange. Like, um, I feel it's like I feel like my body has been left out of the work a lot, which was kind of by design early on, but I feel like maybe it's been left out too much.
Oh, I
Um,
love that. So it's like, yeah, it's very healing to hear that. Yeah.
well, and so I feel like I kind of need to move back into my
Yeah.
body a little bit. And of course, COVID was very difficult and scary, um, and so I think part of the process of like building things actually on my body is, I got a mirror to use in the studio, and
Oh,
um, just trying to
how do
like
you
kind of,
use the mirror?
I'm sorry.
How do you use the mirror?
Well, I want to figure out how the packaging works with my body,
Yeah.
and I'm actually going to be doing some manipulating of it on me, and so just seeing what that looks like
Yeah.
with my body present,
I see. Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
probably displaying it with my body absent, but then the presentation is just sort of like the where I would be.
Yeah.
um
Do you feel like, I mean, maybe this, I don't know, but I'm gonna ask, do you feel like the work is kind of a performance piece in a way?
well, see, that's interesting that you ask, because it didn't occur to me until relatively recently that, because process is so important to me, I don't know why it hadn't ever occurred to me to make that part of the presentation,
Ah,
because I have often thought about what I eventually show as being an artifact of a process rather than like the culmination of making something. It's sort of like, I don't feel like I'm making something. I feel like what I show is like what ended up happening from what I
right,
was
right,
doing.
right.
And so I'm thinking about ways of incorporating that more directly into, because I take a lot of pictures. That's increasingly important to me. Recently, I've been doing a lot of self-portraits, and I think because like the agoraphobia and the panic, I mean, there's a lot of things that my work is about that are closely related to shame. And I think maybe that's why I've maintained that separation.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, but it seems like that's not a separation that serves either me or my work very well. And so, I mean, it's a point that it's not something that I think I really could have done
Right.
at earlier points in my life,
Yeah.
but I feel sort of ready to do that now.
Oh, there's so many possibilities that open
Yeah,
for you.
yeah.
And can you talk about that shame at all, or what it relates to? Like, how would we,
Well,
how do you think the work will, or anything you want to discuss
I
about
mean,
that, but
I think it's strange because like the part of me that experiences that shame is not the part that I feel like I show to the world.
right,
Um, I feel like thought that I was showing it to the world through my work, but I think I was leaving out so much important
yes,
information
that's so
that,
huge.
that it wasn't getting communicated,
Yes,
because nobody is me except me. And like so much of what has made me me goes into making my work, but like it's not carrying at all.
right,
And so I'm trying to figure out how to, because for a long time I thought, well, using packaging metaphorically for someone who's scared all the time and fat is so it's like obvious. It's like, but it's obvious to me,
right, right, right.
Um, and so it was like I wanted to take a very light touch
Yes,
talking
yes,
about
yes.
what
I
my
get
work was
that so
really
much because,
about.
yeah, I remember at one point I was young in my artwork and I thought that work that I was doing was obviously X. And then when somebody said to me, like your work could benefit by, and that's all I had to hear. And my ears were like ringing with like, and I realized that, the suggestion was so light that, you know, somebody might come up with that, but it would just be a guess, you
I
know.
mean,
But
some
yours is
people,
not. Yours is further into
well, some
it,
people
but
think that it's like environmentally motivated or
right.
like zero waste
Sure,
kind of thing, which
sure,
is fine. Like,
sure.
but that's not what it is to me. Like,
Right.
I also think that there's a certain amount of shame making really personal work
Yeah.
because it feels soft and
Yeah.
I don't perceive myself as a soft person. I don't really, I mean, I've always known that I have like this shell of being, sarcastic and all of that.
Right.
But I don't know. I think I have to drop so many of my defenses in my work that I don't want to have to drop them when I'm talking about it, maybe, or when somebody else, I just want people to recognize, but I'm not giving them enough information, maybe.
Yeah. I think well, you are giving a lot. It's not zero for sure. It's a lot, but if you do go, and you will, because there's an interest there, push that and let that vulnerability be a strength, because
Yeah, it's, I think, um, I think I feel like two different people, maybe.
yeah.
Like there was like for a long time I thought about there was the me before the breakdown and the me after. And only recently have I understood that it's all like a continuum and that I'm somewhere in the middle. But I'm kind of a black and white thinker. And so
Really, you
it
think, well, and you've got this grayscale of a life in your work like this, you know.
right, well, and it's like and it's strange now that I say it because I'm so interested in the blurring of the boundary between there and not there. But I really seek like certainty because that makes me feel safer, but I know that I can't have it. And so I think that I try to express vulnerability in my work, but then yeah, I'm not sure that that it's all getting in there, or it's,
Well, I think the more vulnerability, it might feel scary and then it feels like comfortable. And then you go further and it feels
yeah,
scary, and then it feels comfortable.
yeah, that's, yeah, no,
You
you're absolutely
start to
right.
own it. Yeah.
Yeah, you're
So
absolutely right.
that's awesome. So wow, through all this experience, and I'm just excited to see where your work goes from here. And it's like I want to fast forward and see it all.
Well, I mean, I always feel like I'm rocketing toward death, so I don't want to fast forward.
Oh, okay, no, I think we are. But yeah, it's like let's take our time over it. But I'm kind of anxious
Exactly.
too, because I mean, I could see, I mean, like just this flashed into my mind of you like being in a space and us watching you picking that styrofoam
Yeah, no,
out.
absolutely.
And
Right. Well, and
yeah,
because the other thing, well, so there is like, yeah, the sort of early on, I had an idea for an installation that was performance based and interactive, and it required a level of scientific knowledge that I didn't really have. I've communicated for a few years with a scientist who wrote me up a whole proposal. And so that's also something that I want to get back to
oh,
um,
cool. Yeah,
soon.
just the proposal sounds like a document that's cool.
It's, yes. I mean, yeah, it's
I
yeah,
mean,
I
I
don't
could even picture like this hologram of you, it's so
well,
cool.
and I mean, I think the part of me that lives in the world, well, I don't know, it's hard to say. I don't know. I think it's yeah, the whole shame thing, trying to figure out how to be okay with that, and then, or just being okay, like not like separating shame from vulnerability, I think.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that
Uh
makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, to parse that out a little bit. Yeah.
yeah, and like the shape of my body and how it's outside the bounds of what's considered attractive or acceptable, like that's just the truth. And in the same way that like those big peanuts turned yellow, it's the truth. So you have to,
Yeah,
that's
so
where you have to start.
well, what what do you feel like? I mean, is there anything you could impart to artists or women or anything about the panic? Um, or anything that you want to say about some of the things you've learned that other people might, I mean, just having this interview, I think is enough information for people to
Well, I really appreciate what preparing for this has sort of forced me to
for this
do.
interview. Mm,
Exactly. Well, because like you have memories and you have things that have happened to you, but you don't often have to think of them along a single chronology. Um, and especially when you make things, and I mean, it's like when you hear a song and it instantly transports you back to like another time in your life. When you
right,
start looking at the entirety of your work, when you've been doing it for a really long time, and it's like you can learn a lot from looking at your own work because you're separated from it in time, and you're not the person that you were when you made things,
right.
20 and 30 years ago. And so just being able to kind of find myself in that, um I mean, me in 1997 thought that I would never be able to live in New York because I wouldn't be able to handle it. And so being able to like give myself credit for what I have been able to sort of claw back or like figure out. I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy for anybody.
Mm,
It's very difficult to um kind of look yourself in the mirror and say,
point. Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah, really good.
um it's sort of like you are who you are, and like
Yeah.
You can try to change that. You can try to run away from that, but
Yeah.
it's just so much easier and more fulfilling to accept things about yourself, even that make you uncomfortable, and then let them teach you what that says about your place in the world or your ability to contribute. And,
I
you
mean, and
know,
that's ways that you know, come across things like, you know, your discoveries that you've made
yeah,
with your work is because, you know, you get to those points where it's like, oh, this is what's happening, you know, like
yeah. And I mean,
anything with those peanuts or with anything that's happened
yeah,
that were
like
revelations.
it's impossible. It's possible to waste so much energy trying to avoid,
Right,
um,
right. Ugh.
just, I mean, yeah, I don't know. There's so many points when things could have gone very differently. And,
And
you
also, like, yeah, it's like when you told me that, you know, your professor told you, you know, why fire. I mean, it's like you could have heard that and dismissed it and been like,
yeah,
no, fire clay, that's what you do. But you didn't. You heard that, and that changed things for you. Also, just like the process of, like you were saying about the interview, is that, I mean, you spent many hours writing about your work, putting it in an order, looking at it. So I mean, that makes me kind of want to do that myself. I mean, it's like, you know, when
it's
I
a really I mean, I'll be happy to interview you for your own
that's
program
awesome.
if you'd like.
Awesome.
You could interview yourself as a split screen.
And it's supposed to be the inside and outside of me,
Exactly.
my
You could
different personality.
exactly. You could superimpose yourself asking the questions and then answering the questions.
Bonnie, wondering.
Well, that's like we were talking about me having a conversation with myself on the radio
True.
program from 2008 or whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
think you can learn a lot from your
Oh,
past self, even if you
yeah.
aren't that self anymore.
I mean,
Or
you feel like you know all this stuff, but you're right. When you sit down and look at it and read about it and gather your or write about it and gather your thoughts and your images, it's got to be very different, you know. So
well,
that
because there's relationships that didn't exist at,
mm,
between there's an end point, you're able to compare the now to the then. And when it was then, you just had then, and now you're very much focused on now, and then you're not so concerned with
right,
looking
right. It
back. And
changes. It changes.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you doing this. It's
sure, no, I'm
fantastic.
so thrilled that you asked.
And I think people are going to love learning more about you and be in touch with you. And I'll post everything like all your Instagram and your website,
Okay,
all that stuff with the so thank you so much.
okay, sure, no, thank you.
It was really a pleasure.